right. Thank you for joining. Hello, everyone. This is Marc from the Applixure team. I'm joined by Joseph, our head of customer success in the UK, Ireland, and the US. And today we're going to have a little bit of a chat about why you shouldn't necessarily pull the plug on your IT budgets and why it's actually a strategic growth asset to get the foundation of the company right, which is IT. And I'm going to have a chat with Joseph about that. So, Joseph, if you have a short introduction for our viewers, who are you? What do you do? And what's your favorite color?
Okay. Yeah. So my name's Joseph Wiles. I work for Applixure as head of customer success for our UK, Irish, and US customers. I live, breathe, and eat the digital employee experience and helping our customers to improve their end user IT experience within their organizations. And my favorite color is blue, all shades of blue. Yeah.
Nice,
There you go.
nice. Mine's marine blue, so we're actually quite
Yeah.
aligned here then. Fantastic. So, Joseph, it's tricky times now. We're at the end of 2024, obviously, and we're in the height of budget season, of course. You've been recently speaking to quite a lot of our partners and our customers. Budget has recently come up significantly more than in the months before. Can you give it a little bit of a sense what that conversation is about, how teams are like talking about this now, and if there's any insights for other IT teams out there that could be interesting for them to know about?
Absolutely. I do get the sense at the moment, and this is just from the conversations I've been getting, that budgets are really being squeezed a lot more than usual currently, especially with the customers that I'm talking with. I think there's a lot of different things at play at the moment. I think a lot of IT departments are becoming more pressured to cut costs and to fit more within the budgets that they have. So it's becoming an increasingly more difficult um, pressure for them. So it's becoming even more important, I think, become a lot more smarter with how you're using and utilizing your budget. And that's where I think a picture can really help, actually. Yeah.
When it comes to budgets, IT teams are often the first in the line for cuts. And I think that's fundamentally an issue. So we've made some arguments to help IT teams and managers actually tackle those conversations a bit. Let's jump into those points that we've been discussing. And I'm very eager to hear, Joseph, what your customers might think about that, how that will potentially be received. I'll quickly jump into our first point. So saving on IT, like you could significantly increase the amount of downtime. So when we look at this, the average downtime actually for a large enterprise is somewhere between 5 to 9,000 euros or dollars per minute and could
In
well exceed over $300,000 per hour
a
for
huge,
highly dependent industries. That's a huge amount. So it's a lot more costly if you think that you're saving 10,000 versus maybe up to 1 million in terms of revenue that's lost due to potential downtime. So the conversations you're having with our customers or the IT teams you're talking to, is this something that come up? Is this something that they can measure and calculate and make that argument potentially internally if budgets are on the line?
I think there's two ways to think about it. I think you've got your IT departments that really see IT as essential to the growth of the company. And that's great because they've sort of got it right and IT is being invested in, but in a smart way. And ironically, it actually be more cost effective. But then you've got the other end of the spectrum where there are IT departments that are just seen as a cost that needs to be minimized. We tiny bit of our IT budget squeezed as much as possible. And then without really looking at the bigger picture, and a lot of things suffer as a result of that, i.e. productivity, downtime can be absolutely huge. I've spoken to quite a lot of customers who have had huge issues with downtime and seemingly didn't really think that they had a way out of that. And I think the impact of it, as you've highlighted, can be absolutely massive. And so any kind of thought that saving on IT budget just for the sake of it is really short-sighted because the impact is going to have a huge negative impact on your business and on your revenue and your output. It's massive.
Yeah. Well, I just find it difficult to understand that there's an argument for saving, I know 5, 10, okay, let's say maybe 50,000 euros. Like obviously on the line of the budget, that might seem like a lot, but the potential impact is just so big that
Yeah.
it's like, is that really where it's almost like a casino. Like, is that where you're going to gamble? Is
But
that
if you
the
think
right?
about it, yeah, but if you think about it, you're investing in your employees, they all have a salary. And if you're paying that for all of your employees and all of the other costs associated with them and the jobs you're relying on them to do, the digital tools that we have are absolutely essential to achieving that out in majority of cases. So if you're not providing the best possible IT experience for those employees, every little bit of cost saving that you do to try and protect IT budget at the expense of the end users is just going to hit your company. It's going to hit
Mm.
what your company is able to achieve and the output it's giving. That IT should be seen as a way, as a vehicle to grow the business. It should be something that you should be investing in. But the ironic thing is, as I said before, when you actually invest in your IT department, it becomes more efficient and actually becomes more
Mm.
cost effective. So actually, just seeing it as a financial kind of transaction that needs to be minimized is going to have a huge negative impact on your business.
That's an excellent point you actually just now touched on, because when I mentioned like this 300,000 euros or dollars per hour that can be lost, but depending on the industry, and obviously for huge companies like Amazon or Google, we're talking about millions, if not of tens of millions. This actually is not only the cost of revenue, but it's also the legal fees and the reputational damage that follows out of this, let alone employees struggling with trying to get the systems to work, troubleshooting, and not working on core projects that actually generate revenue on top of that, that money could potentially be lost. So when we look at productivity, is there teams out there or like companies that you work with that are actually measuring this, like the potential impact on like lost productivity?
It's really interesting. It's actually a really difficult thing to measure productivity, but that doesn't mean it's not important to be trying to track in some way. There is this really interesting Orbit Half technology survey, which it's a bit old now, but it stands the test of time because I've sort of talked a lot to different IT teams and, I've had this sort of reaffirmed. This is quite a good kind of measure. And this particular survey found on average that each end user loses around 22 minutes a day due to different types of technology issues, which doesn't sound like very much, 22 minutes a day. But if you actually add up 22 minutes a day over a whole year, that's actually 2 weeks of lost productivity. So if you're a company of 500 people with each end user losing 2 weeks a year due to kind of technical issues with their computers and software, that will be 1,000 weeks of lost productivity for the company. Now you do the math, 1,000 weeks times what you're paying an employee, that's a huge amount of money. I dealt with quite a few law firms, and one law firm that I've spoken to recently actually did the maths on this. And they agreed with this figure because they could see that there were quite a lot of productivity issues happening within their environment. They thought they were pretty
Mhm.
average. They thought, okay, that's 22 minutes a day sounds about right for us. I think they worked out it could be costing them like around £6 million a year, the potential impact it could be having on their business. Now, probably never going to be able to eliminate that completely, but even if you could
Mm.
reduce by 20%, 50%, that's going to have a huge impact on the business. Tracking how your technology is empowering productivity is a massive shortfall or oversight, in my opinion, and it needs to be really central to everything you think about when thinking about the technology you offer and how well it works for your employees.
Interesting. I like the example of actually the law firm, because that obviously showcased that every minute lost is like unbillable hours, and that's just lost revenue. But if you compare this to, let's call it the average worker behind the desk, like you and me, basically, we're behind our laptop. Like if you
Yeah.
look at us and then multiply us by 10,000 people, that's also a lot of money. Like, okay, it's maybe less directly correlated, but still 22 minutes,
Oh,
10,000 employees,
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a lot
It's still a
of
huge
lost
amount of
revenue.
money, even if you're not all lawyers. It's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of money and it will be
It's
having a
crazy.
big impact on the business, but it's a silent
Mhm.
mix. And it's funny because I've spoken to a few people and they've sort of seen improving productivity as a kind of a soft benefit. Like it's a soft, oh, it'd be quite a nice thing to achieve. But I don't think sometimes people realize that actually this could be business critical, for businesses where budgets and are tight and, this can be business critical. It could make or break a company. It could be the
Yeah.
defining factor that defines how successful your business is. So it's only going to become more and more so as technology becomes more and more integrated with our work, which, it's fully
Mhm.
integrated now and it's only going to increase. So yeah, so it's only going in one direction.
Yeah. I think actually increasing productivity or like reducing these tech issues, which links to then increasing the productivity, this shouldn't be a soft benefit. I think this is actually a competitive advantage. Like if you
Yeah,
actually manage to reduce this and actually improve your output, you can do more with the same or less, whatever you
yeah,
want to call it. And that actually makes you stand out in the industry. So
definitely.
it's crazy to think that there's a few
It's
like
got to
that.
be, absolutely. But it's got to be a company-wide decision. And that's the thing. Sometimes IT can feel very isolated and then sometimes they don't feel they can make that decision on their own. So it's where the business leaders and everybody within the company have to come together and decide and make that decision that actually this is central to the success of our business. And
Exactly.
I think that's really important because otherwise IT is not if it's seen as a standalone and the business leaders are saying, oh, you need to keep your budgets down, and those conversations aren't being had and that realization isn't being discovered, then this can carry on for a long time, having a really big impact on the business. So I think it's really important to put those glasses on and get full visibility of the effect it's actually having on your business. Because, like I
Mm.
said, it could be huge.
That actually leads me quite nicely to our next argument, obviously, because number one was related to downtime and the cost of lost productivity. The second one is actually more about serious concerns, which is related to security.
Yeah.
Now, reducing the budget related to your IT team, that means there's just less focus on IT. That means they have to do more with less, and there's more likely firefighting going on than actually strategically setting
Mm,
the team right and making sure that you're up to date on modern threats. Now,
mm,
the average security breach, we did some research on this, and this is a study from IBM, is 4.8 million globally is the average security breach cost. That relates to legal fees, that relates to the reputational damage, lost revenue, because who knows what follows after a security breach like that. That is absolutely huge, and that you could even I find it actually somewhat, surprising that if you would see a number like that and your company's thinking like, "You know what? Let's just save like 10, 15% because we need to make the numbers work." I don't feel like this is very strategically the area then to save on. There has to be another area that you cannot deprioritize the security of your company. So
absolutely.
when you're talking to the customers or to our partners, is this something that comes up? Are they aware of reducing IT budgets could result in lowering of security or being resistant to modern threats? How does that conversation go?
I think what's really interesting here is I think actually, on the whole, most IT departments do prioritize security over everything else. But
That's great.
this is a big but. So they sort of have this big security kind of focus, but because they're not kind of looking after their environment properly, which I'm going to come to in a moment, a lot of
Mhm.
these security kind of readiness type issues often get overlooked. Let me give you an
Mm,
example. If you're not really looking after your end user IT environment, your computers and the software specifically, I've done so many health checks on environments, for example, that have over 15 versions of the same software in use, some really, really old versions in use. This isn't just a one off. This happens time and time again in a lot of different IT environments I've looked at. Now,
mm.
these old softwares are extremely vulnerable. And actually, one of the most common routes now for security breaches is via vulnerable software, old versions of software. And these are the kind of things like you may have the most amazing firewalls and all of this set up in your environment, but if just the basics, the security readiness isn't in shape, then you're leaving yourself really vulnerable. That takes
Mm.
a slightly different approach in order to be on top of that all of the time. And from my experience, 9 out of 10 IT teams that I talk to are just not doing kind of haven't got the basic visibility that they need to see when things are vulnerable. Yeah, so that's how I see it. So it's almost like the intention's there, but a lot of the basics aren't in place. They're almost like overlooked because IT's too busy to prioritize with other things or too overstretched. That's why I
You
see
you
it.
So a follow-up question on that is that if you don't have the real-time visibility, how do you then make sure that your policies are actually in place and that you're actually making sure
Exactly.
that that's lived
Exactly.
by? Like, is that then not happening?
Don't get me wrong. Like most IT teams that I've spoken to have got all the policies in place, so that they've got BitLockers enabled on all of their computers. Their critical security updates have been installed. But actually, what if they haven't? What if something's
Mm,
gone wrong? And who's responsible for that? And how do you know when things have gone wrong? And
mm,
what happens then? And that's where I find IT teams are falling short. So they've got all the policies in
mm,
place, but actually no fallback, no visibility of when things have gone wrong. And that is creating huge amount of vulnerability in those environments. I think there's most recent statistic we've had, which is very accurate. It sounds overwhelming, but it's very true, is of
mm,
9 out of 10 health checks that we've run on computer environments. All of the teams that we've shared the results with have all been shocked by the state of the security readiness of their computers in some level or another, reality versus what they thought was the case. And that's where
mhm,
guessing and assumptions and thinking how things are is really dangerous. So if you don't have the
mm.
visibility to absolutely 100% know that the security readiness of all of your devices all of the time, then you're leaving yourself up to having serious vulnerability that could cause some security event, which could
Yeah,
be, you know, as you've mentioned, hugely costly for the business.
yeah. eventually execution is everything. Like you can have all the policies in place or like think about the policies, but eventually executing on this is the key part. And having real time situational awareness, which is the visibility, being ready for modern threats, cybersecurity threats, which is obviously a hot topic nowadays because there's so much going on and the
Mm.
threats only increase more and more. So saving in this area just doesn't feel like it's the strategically the best choice for
They,
companies to
you know,
do.
and also like, you know, end of life OSs in you. It's like generally IT teams all want to have like everybody up to date, but then things slip through the net. There'll be
Mhm.
certain computers that have just, for some reason or another, have not been updated for a long time. It may be devices that are just not used very often. Or whenever I do a health check, you find the devices that have got end of life. It happens time and time again. End of life OSs in use. They're no longer supported. They're no longer getting security updates. So whenever that computer's on, it's extremely vulnerable. And so, you know,
Mm.
these are just a few examples of things where, on the whole, everything looks good, but it only takes one computer, one vulnerable
Mhm.
computer, to have a big security event. And so there should be zero vulnerable computers in your environment all of the time, and you
Yeah.
need the right level of visibility to ensure that.
I think related to this, maybe not exactly the same, but like in the same ballpark is related to compliance. And like there's obviously these privacy laws in place in order to protect if companies get breached, that at least their systems are set up in the right way, and therefore GDPR and other international laws relate to this. Now, that's another risky area that if you're not fully compliant related to the
Yeah.
privacy laws, there's actually significant fines that can follow out
Yes.
of this. This is
Yeah.
not anything new, but like just to remind our viewers of the number is that it's 4% potentially of annual turnover or X amount of millions, whichever is higher. So
Mm.
this is another area. If you save on IT, this is another area where you're exposed, like you're an exposed area. Is this another topic that comes up when you're talking to our customers?
I don't think they realize a lot of the time when I first speak to them how out of compliance they may be. I mean, there's been a few customers I've had when we've done the health checks and they've seen kind of the real state of their environment as opposed to what they thought it was, and quickly realized that they weren't being compliant with their, you know, for a number of different reasons, and that could have big ramifications for their business. And I've obviously gone ahead and corrected that moving
Yeah.
forward. I think from my perspective, there is that realization when they realize things are off. But generally, when I'm speaking to people for the first time, that's normally not necessarily the first thing on their mind, because I think a lot of IT teams have assumed everything's in order.
Mm.
You wouldn't go around your day thinking your IT security was really vulnerable and sit and be happy with your day. You'd be constantly anxious, wouldn't you? But fortunately, I think a lot of IT leaders need to just double check, you know, at least to just make sure that everything is in check, because it's surprising the numbers that aren't. And it's the basics. We're not talking about special things here. We're talking about the fundamental basics are in check.
Moving on to the next argument and helping IT teams defend their IT budgets for the upcoming year and this budget season is also related to employee productivity and the retention. Like, obviously, a
Yeah.
lot of companies are looking for the top talents, and outdated and ineffective IT infrastructure really frustrates employees. It also reduces the productivity and contributes to the turnover of the company. So, we did a little bit of digging here, and it turns out that if an employee leaves related to inefficient tech, it works against them and it really works against their productivity. Replacing an employee on average costs 33% of their annual salary. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, people leave for different reasons, but if the reason is the tech and the productivity, and if they are able to do their job, that's a high cost and that piles up quite fast. Is this another area where the companies that you're working with and talking to, is this something that they're focused on? Is this a priority?
I had one customer fairly recently say to me that they were doing kind of exit interviews when people were
Mhm.
leaving, and the IT was coming up a lot in those exit interviews. They didn't feel they had the right technology to do their job right. So this is a huge issue. If you refer to a study done by Avanti a couple of years ago, they surveyed 10,000 office workers. And they were just doing a kind of DEX type study on the digital employee experience and the effect it was having on different elements of the organization. But part of that was this survey of 10,000 office workers, and they found across the board a huge amount of dissatisfaction. So 49% said that they were unsatisfied with the technology that had been provided to them by their workplace. 64% said that the technology they use directly affects the morale. This is the really interesting one. Well, there's two
Wow.
really interesting ones. 42% said that they'd spent their own money on better tech to work more productively. And that's a bit of a worry if you think about shadow IT and all of that kind of stuff from
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah.
26% said that they were actually considering quitting their jobs because they lacked suitable technology.
Wow.
Yeah. So whether these 26% would actually leave is a different matter. They were happy to say they were considering quitting their job. So that's a lot of dissatisfaction. Those kind of statistics would have a huge impact on the business because
Mm,
from the employee retention side, absolutely. If you're losing employees, they don't feel they've got the best tools to achieve what they want to achieve in their jobs. They feel like things aren't working as well as they could. People are going to become unsatisfied. We live in a world where the digital tools that we use are central to our, if they're not working, if it's
100%.
kind of funded, then they might do better elsewhere. So that's going to have a huge business impact. People are unsatisfied with the tools they've got. They're going to be very unproductive and unhappy, and it's going to create a culture within the business that's only going to be detrimental to the business. So I think a lot of companies have woken up to that and are really prioritizing that. But I think there's still a lot that have still woken up to the impact that it could be having on their business. So I think that it's
Mm,
a real mixture out there in the market. There's those that are really striving to improve that, but then those that are lagging behind. So my
mm.
race to those lagging behind is to quickly catch up because you'll get left behind otherwise.
Yeah, fair point. I think maybe as a second segment in this call or this conversation is like obviously we're not telling here that you can't save in IT. Like obviously there's areas where you can optimize. I
Yeah,
think there are key areas where you should just not save on, and these are the key
yeah,
areas where I think is the most important, or based on the conversations we've had also with our customers. Like they
yeah.
prioritize these areas the most. Now, if we quickly go into areas where you can potentially save, it's the lifespan of your computers and your devices. Now, obviously, this is an area where Applixure can also help. So, based on the conversations and the customers that we've spoken to, Joseph, how can teams extend the device lifespan? How does that happen? And how does Applixure help with that as well?
Very simple. It's like the better you manage and maintain a computer environment, the longer it lasts. It's really that simple. If you look after your machines properly, if you've got constant oversight when things are going wrong and quickly fix them, and when you can actually just see what's happening, you can quickly know, does this device need replacing or can it be extended by another year or two or even three? But a lot of IT teams don't have that visibility. They're just sticking to very strict kind of guidelines like, oh, we have to replace our laptops every 3 years or 4 years or whatever it might be. And that's costing the business a lot of money. And there's a huge amount of savings to be made there because the computer's working and it doesn't need replacing. And that's costing the business a lot of money. They could have extended that device by another 2 or 3 years. It's up to 40% of savings that they could be making. So times that over 1,000 computers in a company, it adds up to a lot of money. So
Yeah.
it's about being it doesn't take a huge amount either. It's not a big job. It's just about being aware of all of your devices, how they're performing, and knowing when to replace. It's just as important as knowing when not to replace. It's about having a
Mm.
real optimization, life cycle optimization strategy in place. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be very simple to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think we ran a calculation obviously before this conversation. And if you have 500 employees and you would keep 25% of the devices that hit the 3 year points and move that to a 5 year, there's hundreds of thousands to be saved in this area.
Yeah.
Some industry experts we've spoken to put
Yeah.
the average that if a device is 4 years old, 80% could easily go another year. These are like significant amounts where you can save if you have the right visibility. Software updates are being done, hardware updates are being done. Let's say easy battery change, like, obviously, this doesn't come at a zero cost hardware update, but it's at least, was it 95%
Yeah.
lower? And like you said, you can actually optimize the device, keep it in the company, and maybe allocate that to a different person who doesn't need to run the entire Adobe Creative Cloud suite at
Yeah.
full or is mining Bitcoins. Like, that's obviously a different requirement. But you can keep that laptop and just save on the cost. It's
Yeah.
that straightforward and simple. And it's
That's
a
great.
bit
Great,
surprising
great.
that you don't have that visibility. You can't
Yeah.
make that decision.
Absolutely. And this goes back to my point earlier when I said that you have to invest in IT to kind of improve it, but then those improvements make IT more cost effective. So actually you're saving
Exactly.
money overall rather than spending it. So, just like from extending the computer life cycle as one example, but, streamlining your software estate, there's so much unused software out there, for
Mm,
example. If you've got visibility of that, that could be saving you huge amounts of money. The opportunities are endless to save huge amount of costs within your IT environment if you're managing it effectively. But the problem is a lot of IT
mm,
teams aren't, and they're kind of in that firefighting, kind of just managing, and that's very expensive.
indeed. I
Yeah.
think The second area where you can easily save is unused SaaS subscriptions. Like there is,
Right.
I mean, we've all worked in a company, we've
Yeah.
had SaaS or employees leaving, didn't know we were still paying for it, and the costs just like kind of pile up. Now,
Mm.
obviously, with Applixure, we are able to measure applications that are on the devices, how often they're being used, like literally see if match this with the amount of seats that you're paying. Especially with extremely expensive tools, this could be a massive cost saver. We
Yeah.
also allow certain tracking of web applications. So this
Yep.
is another big area where you can just easily save, and it's just an ineffective way of spending,
Yeah.
and Applixure just provides insight into that. So, have
Yeah.
you had conversations with our customers where you've been able to identify some SaaS subscriptions that just haven't been used?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the classic ones like Adobe, for example, it's quite expensive software. And then, but, got all these licenses. And then you realize, wow, there's 100 users, 200 users, however many it might be, not actually using it. You've now got data to back up how many licenses you
Mm,
need. Whereas before you were just like, oh, we better buy all these licenses where we're not really sure who's using it, who's not using it. You've got the data. So you can then go back to
mm,
those if you want to. Everyone's got their own policy, but you go back to those users and say, "Hey, we've noticed you're not using this. Do you really need it?" And reduce those licenses right down. I've got customers who, based on the Applixure data, have reduced right down and agreed an extra surplus of like 100 extra licenses, but then they
mm,
pool them and they only give them out to users when they need them, the people who only need them ad hoc. So there's some really smart ways that you can actually optimize your software licensing, but you can only do that if you've got the data on the utilization of those software, and then
mm.
you're properly tracking that. So yeah, it does come up a lot with customers that I speak to.
I think an interesting conversation I recently had as well was with someone in IT, and they said that they also reviewed all their SaaS subscriptions, but they were looking for tools that had overlap. So instead of reducing seats alone, you can actually check which tools do 90% the same or maybe even 100% the same. Do you really need two different tools within the same company or maybe even the same team? Maybe
Mhm.
you can optimize in that area as well. It's just another relatively easy saving. Obviously, there will be some friction. If we're talking about savings, there's
Yeah.
security, there's productivity, there's output, there's downtime. Those are all areas that
Yeah.
you cannot save. It's almost non-negotiable. When it comes to this, you can save on that.
The bigger your software estate and the more version sprawl you have, which you've already talked about, the security implications of that, but the more software you have and the bigger the version sprawl, the harder your environment will be to manage and maintain, and the more
Mm,
tickets you'll be getting from end users having problems. So actually managing your software estate in an optimized way is going to have so many benefits
yeah.
for in so many different ways, and cost savings from the actual software costs to productivity issues from both inside IT and obviously for the end users as well. There's huge benefits there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the third area where you could potentially save on, you could, if you have partners or vendors that you work with, you could renegotiate costs that come from it. Obviously, they rather have your business than not have it at all. Obviously, there is a tipping point for them where it is interesting or not. But IT managers or IT teams could go to their partners, go to their vendors, where they're getting their services or products from. Is there some wiggle room here? And I think that's another area where it's worth investing and looking in. But there's another area in that specific like case where I would like to jump into, and that's optimizing partnerships as well. Like
Yeah.
we've both actually talked to partners that work with MSP specifically, and they sometimes struggle with that partnership. They don't have the visibility or the insight in their own IT fleet, which is actually quite surprising if you think about that. And I
Mm,
think what has really come up recently with our customers is that they use Applixure to just gain insight into their IT fleet, just what is the status. But
yeah.
then they use Applixure workflow to see what was the SLA or XLA, depending on agreement you have. Are they living up to the agreement that we have made? Like how long has a specific case stuck and has the ticket not been dealt with? So I think this is another thing. You don't have to spend more on your MSP. You can just make sure that the existing contract or SLA is actually enforced and you have the insight to have that conversation with your MSP. And that has been super interesting for us to see that our customers are using it this way. Is there another example or is there this with this
Yeah.
specific example that you
Yeah, it enhances the relationship. And at the end of the day, the way I see it is, yes, you can outsource to an MSP to manage your computer environment, but you still own your computer environment. It's still your
Mhm.
responsibility as a company. So it's really important that you know what's going on with it, even if you aren't
Yeah.
actively fixing things yourself. But on the other hand, having that data also helps you to work better with your MSP because you can then define what projects need to be prioritized, what things need to be prioritized. And I've just recently been working with one particular customer And we found a lot of kind of potential security issues within their environment, which the MSP hadn't uncovered. So it's just like, it's not about blaming anybody. It's just about going, so these are issues that maybe they weren't looking at. So it's about having that kind of collaborative relationship with your MSP where you
Mm.
have constant oversight of what's going on in your environment, and anything that may not be quite right, you can raise and have
Mhm.
discussions with your MSP about, and to develop new processes to solve those. And without that visibility and that insight, how can you do that? You can't. You just got to trust
Yeah.
that everything's in place when it might not be. So it's really important to have that.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. That wraps up our conversation a bit. And maybe to quickly recap, the arguments on how to defend for your IT budget is that first, why you shouldn't cut in certain areas, the downtime and the productivity. There's just a cost
Yeah.
to it, and that's not worth risking.
Yeah.
Security and the compliance data privacy laws, that comes with a very hefty price and potentially reputational damage. So that's
Yeah.
another area why you shouldn't save there. Employee productivity, the retention of it, there are just costs that come with it. But then
Mm.
there's areas where you can save, and the areas that we consider that have, well, the quickest wins and the
Yeah.
substantial impact on the bottom line are the extending the lifespan of your devices, cracking down really on unused SaaS subscriptions, and then see if you can renegotiate prices with your vendors and partners and get
Yeah.
more out of the existing partnerships that you can just make sure that you also enforce and you have the right tools in order to
Yeah.
navigate that conversation. So I think that's the conclusion for us where you should
Yeah.
optimize and for 2025 budgets where you can focus on. Any final remarks, Joseph, that you want to give?
Sometimes just the final thing, which I've said a few times already, like the more you can invest in making your environment more safe, more compliant, and more efficient, then the more cost effective it becomes. So like
Mm.
sometimes you have to invest to save money longer term, and the quick wins as well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Joseph, for the insights. Very interesting to hear with our customers and partners and the conversations you've had recently and bring them to this conversation. So hopefully other IT managers or teams or CIOs or system administrators can learn from that and apply that to their day-to-day as well. Thank you very much. And let's catch you on the next one.
Catch you on the next one, Match. Cheers, Mark.